No, just rinse them. Hello, cool cats and kittens. So we're going to try this Trig thing videoing. I'm not going to show my face on here because I do not have on makeup. And so hopefully you can follow along with these notes that I'm going to give you guys and maybe learn something. Okay, so first of all, we're in chapter 6. So 6.1 is inverse relations and functions. Okay, so first of all, recall that a relation is a set of ordered pairs. For example, set, so we use set braces. There's a relation. Just a random, this is a random set of ordered pairs. It doesn't have any kind of correlation or anything to it. Okay, so remember that the domain is the x coordinates. Whoops. And the range is the set of y coordinates. And the inverse switches the x and y coordinates. So the inverse would be, instead of 1, 2, would be 2, 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, 6, 4, and 8, 5. Just switch the x and the y coordinates. So you should have learned that in Algebra 1, like the inverse for a simple relation is pretty easy, okay? It's going to just flip the ordered pair. But the inverse for a function, which you should learn in Algebra 2, but we're going to recall it also just switches the x and the y. So, recall again. The inverse for a function switches the x and y, and then solve for y. Okay, for example, say you want to find the inverse of y equals plus or minus square root of x. Okay, so first you're going to literally switch the x and y. So you get x equals plus or minus square root of y. Everything else stayed the same, just literally switch the x and the y. Now, the second thing you're going to do is solve for y. So I got x equals plus or minus square root of y. The first thing I'm going to do is square both sides to get rid of the radical. That cancels that. It also gets rid of your plus or minus, because if you square a positive, you get a positive. If you square a negative, you get a positive. So it gets rid of that also. You can kind of just ignore that. Okay, so I get y, and then over here I get x squared. Now, since this is the inverse, we're going to indicate inverse by putting a -1 on the y. So it would look like this. Y to the -1 equals x squared. And this would be the inverse. Now, important to remember that the -1 doesn't mean anything. It's not a power. Okay, it's not, has any mathematical value in this case. It just is a symbol to indicate inverse. Okay, if we were using f of x instead of y, we could also write it like this: f -1 of x is equal to x squared. That's how we would write it. Your original would be just f of x. Your inverse would be that way. Okay, the -1 indicates inverse here, not reciprocal. Okay, don't mistake it for reciprocal. I know on the calculator we use the -1 key, the power of a -1 key for a reciprocal when we have to flip it, like when we're doing trig functions, but that's not the case here. In the case here, it's just a symbol for inverse. All right, let's keep going. We'll look at another example. How about this one? Okay, so y equals 2x plus 4. The first thing that we're going to do is switch the x and the y. Literally just trade places for the x and the y. And then we're going to solve for y. So we're going to draw our line. The y is right there. We're going to subtract 4. Get rid of addition and subtraction first. These are not like terms, so we're just going to say x minus 4. We just list it out. And then we're going to, this is multiplied, so we're going to divide by 2. You can divide the whole thing by 2, or you can divide each term by 2. On inverse, it's usually okay just to divide the whole thing by 2. So I'll put my little -1 there to indicate inverse, and it would be x minus 4 all over 2. That would be my inverse. Now, so when you have an inverse, so this right here is a line. If you'll think back to algebra, okay, y equals 2x plus 4. 4 is going to be my y-intercept, and 2 is going to be my slope, okay? So if I was to graph this, I would go to 4. That's my starting point. And then remember, you're going to put this over a 1. Then you'll rise 2, run 1. So go back to my graph over here. I would rise 2, run 1. So this would be this line. This is my original. Now, my inverse, when I graph it, for graphing purposes, I'm going to go ahead and break it up. Instead of putting the whole thing over 2, I'm going to go ahead and put x over 2 minus 4 over 2, and 4 over 2 is just 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay, so that makes 1/2 right here my slope. And then my y-intercept is -2. So go over here to -2. Then you're going to rise 1 and run 2. Now, this is my inverse. This is my original. Now, if you look and make them go long enough where they actually cross each other, my graph's not that great, never is. Any original function and its inverse are always symmetrical about the line y equals x, a perfect diagonal line. So the two lines should be symmetrical about that perfect diagonal line. Does that make sense? Now, you're not going to have to graph any of these, but if you ever are on a test or something and you have to choose which graph indicates inverse, then you'll know that it should be symmetrical about that perfect diagonal line right there, y equals x. So I'm going to make that a note. Any function and its inverse are symmetrical. Now remember, that means if you folded it on that line, they would match up. Okay, are symmetrical about the line y equals x, which is a perfect diagonal line. All right, if there aren't any questions, I know you can't ask questions, but you can text me some questions on Remind if you need to, okay? But if there aren't any questions, we're going to stop right here, and I am going to give you some practice problems. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post a picture of the practice problems on the Remind app, so you guys can get started on those. Also, if you have a question on one, just text me back through that or whatever, or you can call me or whatever you need to do. But I forgot what I was going to say. See, just like real class. So anyway, just if you have a question now, your assignments are for they're suggested assignments. What we will do is in a few days or at the end of this 2 weeks, we'll take a little quiz. Okay. And that will be your grade. And I'll post that quiz also on the Remind app. So anyway, that's kind of how this class will work. So text me if you have any questions. I love you guys. I miss you, and I hope you're staying safe.